Section 4, Quantitative Reasoning, Topic 1, Arithmetic for GRE. Introduction. Hello and welcome to this video on arithmetic for the GRE. In this video, we will cover the arithmetic concepts and skills that you need to master to do well in the quantitative reasoning section of the GRE. Body. Let's start by looking at the types of arithmetic questions you can expect on the GRE. Arithmetic questions can be broken down into four main categories: basic arithmetic, fractions, decimals, and percentages. Basic arithmetic includes addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of whole numbers, as well as finding the least common multiple and greatest common factor of two or more numbers. Fraction questions on the GRE can involve adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing fractions, as well as finding equivalent fractions and converting between mixed numbers and improper fractions. Decimal questions on the GRE can involve adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing decimals, as well as rounding decimals to a given place value and converting between decimals and fractions. Percentage questions on the GRE can involve finding a percentage of a number, finding what percent one number is of another, and finding the original amount given the percentage increase or decrease. Now that we have an idea of the types of arithmetic questions that you can expect on the GRE, let's look at some tips to help you solve them. Tip number 1, read the question carefully. This may sound obvious, but it's important to take your time and make sure you understand what the question is asking. Sometimes questions can be worded in a confusing way, so make sure you know exactly what you're being asked to do. Tip number 2, use scratch paper. The GRE provides scratch paper, so use it to your advantage. Write down any formulas or calculations that you need to do to solve the problem. This will help you keep track of your work and make sure you don't make any careless mistakes. Tip number 3, estimate when possible. You don't always need to calculate the exact answer to a question. Sometimes it's enough to estimate the answer to within a range. This can save you time and help you eliminate answer choices that are clearly too high or too low. Conclusion. In conclusion, arithmetic is an important part of the quantitative reasoning section of the GRE. By mastering the basic arithmetic concepts and practicing your skills, you can improve your chances of doing well on the exam. Section 4, Quantitative Reasoning, Topic 2, Algebra for GRE. Introduction. Welcome to our video series on quantitative reasoning for the GRE. In this video, we will be covering Topic 2, Algebra for GRE. Algebra is an essential part of the GRE quantitative reasoning section, and it tests your ability to manipulate equations and variables. In this video, we will cover the basics of algebra and the concepts tested on the GRE. Basics of algebra. Algebra is a branch of mathematics that deals with variables and symbols to represent quantities and the relationships between them. Some basic algebraic operations include addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We use algebraic expressions to represent these operations. Variables. In algebra, variables are used to represent unknown quantities. Variables are typically represented by letters like x, y, or z. In the GRE, you will need to use variables to solve problems that involve unknown quantities. Equations. An equation is a statement that asserts that two expressions are equal. Equations typically involve variables and constants. You will need to solve equations on the GRE by manipulating the variables to find the value of the unknown quantity. Linear equations. A linear equation is an equation that involves a linear relationship between variables. Linear equations are represented by a straight line when graphed. Linear equations can be solved by manipulating the variables using algebraic operations. Quadratic equations. A quadratic equation is an equation that involves a quadratic relationship between variables. Quadratic equations are represented by a parabola when graphed. Quadratic equations can be solved by factoring or using the quadratic formula. Functions. A function is a rule that assigns a unique output for each input. Functions can be represented using algebraic expressions or graphs. You will need to know how to evaluate functions and find the inverse of a function on the GRE. Exponents and roots. Exponents and roots are important concepts in algebra. An exponent is a number that indicates how many times a base number is multiplied by itself. A root is the opposite of an exponent and indicates which number, when raised to the specified power, gives the original number. Conclusion. In conclusion, algebra is an important part of the GRE Quantitative Reasoning section. It tests your ability to manipulate equations and variables. Section 4, Quantitative Reasoning, Topic 3, Geometry for GRE. Types of geometry questions. Geometry questions in the GRE can be divided into two types, coordinate geometry and plane geometry. Coordinate geometry involves plotting points on a graph and finding distances and slopes between them. Plane geometry deals with shapes and figures in a two-dimensional plane, and involves concepts such as angles, triangles, circles, and polygons. Approaching coordinate geometry questions. To approach coordinate geometry questions, the first step is to plot the points given in the question on a graph. Once the points are plotted, you can find the distance between them by using the distance formula, and the slope between them by using the slope formula. These formulas are easy to remember and can be applied quickly in the exam. Approaching plane geometry questions. To approach plane geometry questions, it's important to be familiar with the basic concepts of geometry such as angles, triangles, circles, and polygons. You should also be familiar with the different formulas related to these concepts, such as the area and perimeter formulas for triangles and circles. It's also important to understand the properties of different types of triangles, such as equilateral, isosceles, and scalene triangles. You should know the properties of different types of angles, such as acute, obtuse, and right angles, and be able to identify them quickly in a figure. Finally, it's important to be familiar with the Pythagorean theorem, which is a fundamental theorem in geometry that relates to the sides of a right-angled triangle. You should know how to apply this theorem to find the missing side length of a right-angled triangle. Tips for solving geometry questions. Here are some tips to help you solve geometry questions effectively. Draw a diagram. Drawing a diagram can help you visualize the problem and make it easier to solve. Label the diagram. Labeling the diagram with the given information can help you keep track of what you know and what you need to find. Break down the problem. Breaking down a complex problem into smaller, more manageable parts can make it easier to solve. Use the answer choices. Sometimes, the answer choices can give you a clue as to how to approach the problem. Eliminating answer choices that are clearly incorrect can also help you narrow down the correct answer. Section 4, Quantitative Reasoning, Topic 3, Introduction to Data Analysis for GRE. In this topic, we will cover important concepts, formulas, and strategies that you need to know to ace the quantitative reasoning section of the GRE. In today's video, we will provide an introduction to data analysis and discuss its relevance to the GRE. Data analysis is an essential part of the quantitative reasoning section of the GRE. It involves interpreting, organizing, and presenting data in the form of graphs, charts, and tables. Exactly. Data analysis is all about understanding data and drawing conclusions from it. It requires you to use mathematical and statistical skills to analyze information, identify trends, and draw conclusions. Let's dive deeper into the basics of data analysis. One of the key components of data analysis is the use of graphs and charts. They allow us to visualize the data and make it easier to interpret. For example, here we have a graph that represents the number of hours spent studying for the GRE versus the GRE score. As you can see, there is a clear positive correlation between the two variables, which means that the more you study, the higher your score is likely to be. So, to do well on the GRE, it's important to have a solid understanding of data analysis and be able to interpret graphs and charts. That's right. And in our next video, we will discuss the different types of graphs and charts you are likely to encounter on the GRE, as well as some tips on how to analyze them effectively. Types of graphs and charts for the GRE. Welcome back to our series on data analysis for the GRE. In our last video, we talked about the importance of data analysis and how it relates to the quantitative reasoning section of the GRE. Today, we will discuss the different types of graphs and charts you are likely to encounter on the GRE, and how to analyze them effectively. Graphs and charts are a critical component of data analysis on the GRE. There are several different types of graphs and charts, each with its unique features and characteristics. That's right. Let's start with the most common type of graph, the line graph. A line graph displays data points connected by a line. It is useful for showing trends over time, such as stock prices or weather patterns. Here we have an example of a line graph that shows the number of visitors to a museum over a period of 6 months. As you can see, there is a clear upward trend in the number of visitors, with a significant spike in the month of May. Another common type of graph is the bar graph. A bar graph displays data in the form of rectangular bars. It is useful for comparing different categories or groups. Absolutely. Here's an example of a bar graph that compares the number of cars sold by 3 different manufacturers over a period of 1 year. Like, share, and subscribe to Study Metro for more awesome content.